Hello, it's the You Are My Boro video and podcast that we didn't want to be recording at the back end of this week. And to be honest, Scott, we didn't think we'd be recording either, did we?
Wembley hotels cancelled, trains cancelled, everything off. We didn't. No, we didn't. I haven't said all along that it's going to be Boro v Sunderland. It's going to be Boro v Sunderland. It's neither, is it? And I mean, we'll get into it properly in a second, but really, really disappointing from a Boro point of view, wasn't it? It was, the worst possible point, obviously, to throw in. Probably their flattest performance under Carrick for quite some time in a game that mattered. I mean, we'll talk again about those 3 games at the end of the season, but in terms of a game that mattered, it was really disappointing, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're going to have a look back on the second leg, the playoffs in general. Obviously, we'll have a general recap of the season and obviously look ahead to the summer and what comes next. We are going to keep the You Are My Boro videos and podcasts running throughout the summer, obviously. So do let us know if there's anything you want us to discuss, because we'll be kind of nailing down specific topics really each week rather than just having a general chinwag. And obviously we'll get the special guests in. We've got a couple lined up for the next few weeks. Starting with obviously the second leg, Scott. What went wrong for Boro?
It's a good question, isn't it? Everything is probably the answer. I mean, what went wrong? They just never got any kind of momentum going in that game at all, did they? Other than the last 10 minutes, which was probably the only point that Coventry really started dropping deep and hanging on to what they had. Other than that kind of flurry, which was all a bit frantic and all a bit messy and never really looked like it was going to result in a goal, I thought the Boro were just off it all over the park. Now, I've seen some fans and some people say that over the course of the 2 legs, they thought Boro were actually much the better team and probably deserved to win it and deserved to win on the night. I don't really buy that. I thought that for most of that second leg, Coventry were the better team without ever really looking like they were going to cause a whole host of problems. But I thought Gyökeres was way better than he'd been in the first leg. I thought he was a problem that Boro never really got on top with all night. That kind of set the tone for it. And then in an attacking sense, it just didn't happen at all for Boro, did it?
No, I agree with you. I think it'd be hard pressed to make a case for either team coming away from that on Wednesday night saying, well, we were the better team. But the way it felt to me was that Coventry had Boro at arm's length throughout, really. Yeah. You felt that they'd done a number on them, really. And I know we talked about it afterwards, but Mark Robins sticking an extra man in midfield, I thought worked a treat, because they kind of crowded Hackney out, who was the best player on the pitch in the first leg. They forced Boro out wide, and as Robins said afterwards, the quality from the wide areas probably wasn't as good as what you'd expect. Yeah. They did a job on Akpom, didn't they? And Archer had a frustrating night. He had a frustrating 2 legs, didn't he, Archer? It always felt like it was going to come to a moment, didn't it? It was going to be decided by a moment, and Hamer's finish was brilliant.
I thought the midfield point's a really interesting one, because you're right that that Robins got it right in terms of effectively switching to a 5-man midfield, getting an extra body in there, and just making it very hard for Boro to play through that. I also think that of all the talk about all the injured players, everybody missing this, that, and the other, they missed Johnny Howson. Yeah. I thought they missed Johnny Howson for 2 reasons. One, because I think he's the one that would have got on the ball, popped passes around, actually dictated the pace of a game from a Boro point of view, because I did feel, like you were saying, for most of the night, it was Coventry really were dictating the pace that game was played at. I think Howson would have changed that. I also think that had Howson been playing, Hayden Hackney is playing 15, 20 yards higher up the pitch. He becomes a much more creative threat. He links better with Akpom and with Archer, and I just thought that was missing. I thought that for big periods of that second leg, you had Hackney and Mowat pretty much alongside each other as a kind of double pivot. And then you had a 20-yard gap to Akpom that Coventry were just able to fill and make it really hard for Boro to pass through them.
I think the other point on Howson as well is when it did get a bit frantic in the second half, you probably lacked his leadership and experience just to settle things down in the middle.
Yeah.
And you know, the camera cut to Howson and Ramsey, didn't it? A few times they were sat just behind the dugout, and Ramsey was kicking every ball. But I felt for Howson because he's talked at length, really, in the second half of the season about how, you know, he came to Boro to get promoted. He's determined to achieve this dream at Boro, and this is probably the best Boro team he's played. Well, I don't think there's a probably about it, actually, is that this is the best Boro team he's played in, and to kind of helplessly have to watch on from the stands for the last 2 or 3 games of the season, and then the playoffs must have been agony for him, mustn't it? Especially, you know, we know the type of character Howson is. That must have been.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. He'll have felt that at the worst possible time he wasn't able to contribute, won't he? And the problem, you know, he signed this new deal, and we've been saying this season he's been as good as ever, and he absolutely has been. But there will come a point where he's not as good as ever. And clearly that point is coming sooner rather than later just because of the age that he is. So, you know, you do wonder this time next season if Boro are having a good season, and hopefully you're right. Well, hopefully they've got it automatically, but whatever. Will Johnny Howson still be as integral and as influential as he has been this season? Listen, there's a chance he might. We've thought that he's on his way out for the last 3 years pretty much, and he keeps defying expectations. So there's a chance that he might, but there's a chance that he might not. And it would be a real shame if, as you say, you know, the kind of peak moment of his Boro career, or the peak team that he's played in, the best chance he's had to actually get out of there, you know, through no fault of his own, he hasn't been able to do anything about it.
For all we'll obviously analyse Boro and the performances over the course of the 2 legs, Coventry do deserve immense credit, don't they? Because the idea before the first leg of Coventry keeping Boro out for 180 minutes would have been laughed at, really, given what we've seen from Boro in an attacking sense. In that first leg in the first half, Boro had their moments, didn't they? Akpom hit the bar, Jones couldn't, maybe should have scored.
And in hindsight, that was their best spell of the game, wasn't it? That first 20 minutes of the first leg.
Yeah. But fair play to Coventry. Over the course of the 2 legs, they did a job on Boro, didn't they?
Well, they did, absolutely. I thought the 3-man central defence was really good. McNally, McFadzean, Doyle, really good. I thought McFadzean was excellent at the heart of the defence. I thought he dealt with Archer really well. Callum Doyle obviously watched last year with Sunderland, and he's always been a ball-playing defender who's got an awful lot of talent. You know, you don't get to where he's got to at Man City without it. But he's learned how to defend. That was his problem at Sunderland. He couldn't just do the nuts and bolts of the defensive job necessarily. On the evidence of these last 2 games, he can do that now. And he's you know, I think he's still a teenager. He's going to be a real talent moving forward. So, yeah, they did. Defensively, I thought they were great. And then, like I say, at the other end of the pitch, listen, it wasn't a night when Gyökeres had a whole host of chances and you know, was a real menace in the 18-yard box. But every time the ball went up to him, I thought Boro looked uncomfortable. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that Smith, Lenihan and McNair all got yellow cards at some stage in the night, didn't they, for fouls on him? And Boro just about managed to keep him under wraps. But he was always an out ball for Coventry. He could always get them up the pitch. And obviously, he sets up the goal, doesn't he? He breaks over the top, just about gets round Stefan, and then Hamer comes in and, to be fair, puts a brilliant finish in what was a pretty congested penalty area by then. But it was Gyökeres who made the run, and he was the one all night for Coventry. And you know, we've quite rightly praised Chuba all season, and Chuba's a different type of player, but as a number 9. Gyökeres is the best in the Championship by an awful long way, and he's arguably one of the top 5 or 6 potentially in England as a pure number 9. I'd be really interested to see, obviously, if Coventry get up, how he does next year. But if they don't, I'd be amazed if he wasn't playing in the Premier League next year. Yeah,
I said exactly that yesterday. The general consensus afterwards, or one of the kind of real points of frustration for Boro fans I've spoken to, seems to be the idea of this missed opportunity, really. When you look at the teams who are going out of the league now, you look at Southampton, and I'll let you explain this point that you were saying to me last week about how strong Southampton are going to be when they come down and the players they're likely to keep. It's likely to be 2 of Leicester, Everton, and Leeds. Now, I look at Leicester and, without knowing, you look and think, will they do what Newcastle did and just throw everything at it to try and get out in the first year? Leeds are a bit of an unknown, aren't they? And obviously we've never seen Everton in the Championship. You've got Ipswich coming up, who are going to have momentum and money. You've got Norwich, Watford, and West Brom, who you'd fancy to be stronger. So I completely get this argument, and I agree that the Championship is going to be stronger next year. What I would say is, last season you would have said that Norwich and Watford are coming down. They're nailed on to go straight back up. Yeah. They always do. West Brom are going to be strong. Luton probably looked at their playoff defeat to Huddersfield last year and were saying the same thing. This was our chance. You only have to look at the makeup of next week's final, Coventry versus Luton, to know that, you can't predict the Championship, can you?
There's a few elements to that.
I get both sides of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, really. I mean, I think it's hard because Coventry and Luton deserve to be there. They've been really good all season, and it's hard not to be kind of disrespectful towards them. But I do get that there's an element that if you'd said at the start of the season or the start of any season, okay, you're going to get in the playoffs, you're going to have to beat Coventry, and then you're going to have to beat Luton at Wembley, you would say, well, we'll take that, wouldn't you? When you look at all the other teams that have been in the Championship this year now, that then almost takes us into the next point, because what a team is like on paper and what they actually are like over 46 matches in a Championship season is very different. So, whoever comes down out the Premier League will have an awful lot of wreckage to sift through and an awful lot to get right. And some do it, some don't. But yeah, I think you're right. If you look at Southampton are the worst team in the Premier League by, a reasonable amount of distance, hence why they're bottom and are already down. But, they might get Teller back from Burnley. All right, Teller might sign permanently, but they might get him back. They will, they'll lose Ward-Prowse, probably Walker-Peters, probably Lavia, but they probably keep Adam Armstrong, who scores 20-odd goals every time he plays in the Championship. Good chance to keep Shea Adams, who you would imagine would score potentially 20 goals in the Championship. Probably a good chance to keep Stuart Armstrong, who's an international player and who, so they're going to be strong. The teams that come down are going to be strong. Ipswich, I think, are really interesting. Like you say, they've got a bit of a sniff of Sunderland about them, where they finally seem to have turned things around and got on an upward trajectory. Big club, big fan base, bit of a feel-good factor. I'm not saying they'll necessarily go straight through, but it would not surprise me if they were in the playoff equation next year. Then you're going to have, obviously, one of Luton or Coventry. You're going to have Millwall, who you would imagine will be in and around it, because that seems to be where they're at now. And then you've got your Norwiches, Watfords, West Broms, who, are they going to be as bad next year? They might be. But if they spend sensibly this summer, maybe they can build. So, listen, Boro will spend as well. Boro will strengthen again. Boro will rebuild. So there's no reason why we can't be going into next season saying Boro have the look of promotion contenders about them. But I do have a bit of sympathy and agreement with people who say, do you know what, this feels like an opportunity missed, because Coventry in a playoff semi-final, Luton in a playoff final. Are you going to get as good a chance again? Yeah, let's see.
What do you think the summer holds then? Because Michael Carrick was reluctant, and understandably, it was 5, 10, 15 minutes after. Well, actually, it was longer, because it was 40 minutes by the time he left the dressing room. There was a kind of long debrief. He was talking about how distraught the players were, understandably, but it was still raw. It was immediately after the game, and although he was saying he was reluctant to talk about the future, he actually did, in various answers, shift his response to talking about the future and the need to bounce back stronger and to come again. And I think the words we used were, it's up to us what happens next. What do you foresee happening next?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because kind of in an ideal world, Boro have got an awful lot right this season. So you just want to build incrementally and not have to turn everything upside down. The problem, obviously, is you've got an awful lot of loan players in that squad. So Zach Steffen goes back to Man City, probably ends up moving somewhere, probably not to Boro, given how much wages he's on and what that'll cost. Ryan Giles, who a month or a couple of months ago, it sounded like there was probably a decent chance that Boro could get him. All of a sudden now, the mood music seems to be, no, he's going back to Wolves. They want a proper look at him in pre-season. Maybe he'll be one of Wolves' 2 left-backs next season. You've obviously got the 2 Villa lads. Again, a chance that you could get Ramsey back on loan? Yeah, I think there probably is, but it's probably very late in the window. It's probably a last week before the deadline type thing. Archer, I think you're probably going to struggle because I suspect Villa will either want to give him a run in the first half of the season or get some Premier League experience into him. So I think Archer becomes a different one. I mean, even Moat, who, you know, you wouldn't have thought about really 3 months ago. You know, he's now your kind of replacement for Johnny Howson at the moment. So, you know, and it sounds like at the minute he's going back to stay at West Brom. So that's already quite a big rebuild you're talking about, given that it's your number one keeper and it's your main striker at the other end of the pitch for Tuba to play off. So they're going to have to get things right, aren't they? Now, what you would say is, in the last 2 transfer windows, they have got things right. And clearly having Michael Carrick there should help in terms of getting Premier League loans in. The way that Boro have successfully handled the likes of Stephen, Giles, Ramsey, Archer should help in terms of Premier League clubs trusting them. So, you know, I think there's reasons to be optimistic about the business that Boro will do this summer. And as ever, you know, we're not talking Premier League riches, but there will be some money to spend there. But it feels like a bigger rebuilding job than you would maybe have anticipated, just because there's so many gaps they need to fill.
You touched on it there about...
And just one more. And what they probably haven't got this summer is a Jed Spence that you can sell to fund it all. If they are wanting to spend kind of meaningful money this summer, then it's hard to see how the wheel and dealing works with that when your best players this summer, other than Tuba, who you wouldn't want to lose, have probably been your loan players.
Yeah, and on that, you touched on it there, and kind of how Boro have shown this season that can be not trusted, because that's patronising, but you know what I mean. That this is a good place for young players to come and develop their football under Michael Carrick. Tony Mowbray talks about it a lot, doesn't he, on how he looks back on the various young players he's managed, young loan players he's managed. He talks about Harvey Elliott at Blackburn, obviously Amad Diallo this year. And Premier League clubs do recognise that, don't they? Now, if you're a top-end Premier League club or a young Premier League player, you look at A, the Michael Carrick factor, but B, the football Boro have played this year, the fact it's been a young, fearless team, and the fact Carrick isn't afraid to make loan players a key part of his team. You can well see that Premier League clubs, and again, I'm not saying that Boro's team next year is going to be built around loan players, but you can well see that Boro will be in a strong position to bring a couple of young players in on loan from the Premier League.
Yeah,
and the loan market's so mixed, isn't it? You know, if you look back over the last 10, 15 years, probably at any club that have spent a lot of time in the Championship, that there are as many ineffective loan signings made as there are effective. But you look at this year, and Archer and Giles and Ramsey and Stefan, you can make a case for them all being among Boro's best loan signings, probably of the Riverside era.
And I think that's a way that the things have shifted a bit. In that, I think that 5 or 10 years ago there was a debate to be had about the value of loan players and whether you're better off having your own players. You know, do loan players when the push comes to the shove really buy into it, etc., etc. I think those days are gone now. I think the reality is that unless you're a Championship club with massive parachute payments, probably on your first season down, where you don't necessarily need to loan players in because you've got a bloated squad probably anyway. Generally nowadays, the teams that do well in the Championship are the ones that use the loan market really well. I mean, you know, Burnley did it. Sheffield United had the 2 lads from Man City, didn't they? Boro have obviously done it. Sunderland definitely did it. Luton and Coventry probably less so, in fairness, which are the 2 teams in the Championship. And they're 2 teams that have probably built squads over the course of 3 or 4 years, moving up the leagues and have got a really strong core. And they're just adding little bits around that. So that's probably the other way to do it. But it's a longer term build. I think if you're looking at this Boro side and saying, okay, how are you going to get them into automatic promotion contenders next season? Then I think you have to use the Premier League loan market effectively, because you just can't afford to buy the types of players who can fill the gaps of the players who was going to be leaving without it.
What's another interesting one, and this is something we'll talk about at length, I'm sure, over the summer, and we'll do a specific vid and pod on. But last year, had someone said to you that Hayden Hackney was going to emerge and play such a starring role, you'd probably have, turned your nose up a little bit at the prospect of that, because we haven't seen the signs of that. Now, Boro have got Josh Coburn coming back from a decent loan spell at Bristol Rovers. But there is also the possibility of a young player making a breakthrough. Now, if you look back at the last few years, obviously Hackney this year, Coburn the year before, Jed Spence, Isaiah Jones, there has been a string of loan players coming through. Carrick in his press conference last week was talking about Hackney and the pride in seeing a young academy player coming through, and he knows what the academy means to a club like Boro. And he was asked at the end, have you seen some more? Is there more there to come through? And he's obviously not going to name names and put pressure on, but he kind of gave a knowing smile and said yes. Pre-season will be interesting to see.
Yeah,
who, we'll have a quick mention about Camille Conde before we finish, who's going to play for Gateshead in the FA Trophy final this weekend. But pre-season will be interesting because there's always the possibility of one or two players who we perhaps didn't consider being key players emerging and playing pretty central roles next season.
Yeah, absolutely, which will be really interesting. I mean, you've obviously also got Coulson coming back, haven't you? Who's a bit of a forgotten man, but Carrick's is on the record as saying, no, I know him, and I want to see him. Let's see what he's got, kind of thing. So yeah, that'll be interesting.
Sorry to put in, the interesting one there with Coulson is, with Giles going back, Bowler is more of a left back than a left wing back, isn't he? Coulson might well come back and think, I've got a real chance. He knows how much Woodgate likes him. It was under Woodgate that he got his chance. He might well come back and think, I've got a real chance here to nail down that spot and make it mine.
Well, you'd imagine that he'd play the way that Carrick would want his fullback to play it, doesn't he? We're not saying like for like with Ryan Giles, but similar type of fullback, as you say, definitely more comfortable on the front foot than the back. So that's an interesting. Coburn's going to be interesting. Coburn's going to be very interesting because he's still very young, but you get the feeling that if it's going to happen for him, then it needs to happen next season. He's had his sniffing at Boro. He's now had this lengthy loan spell away. I don't want to say make or break because he's a young lad and he's got the whole of his future ahead of him, but if it's going to happen for him at Boro, you suspect that it's going to happen next season and he's going to be in there from the start as part of Michael Carrick's first team squad. Not necessarily starting every week. I don't think that. He's not going to be Boro's main striker all season with Chuba kind of playing off his shoulder. I don't envisage that. But I do envisage him being part of the first team squad, getting regular match minutes and, potentially evolving into a regular starter as the season goes on.
We haven't really talked about this idea of Boro losing the momentum, having secured a playoff place so early, and obviously having 3 games to spare before they go into the playoffs. Obviously, the secured a playoff place and 4th place basically before the games against Luton, Rotherham, and then Coventry. What are your thoughts on whether kind of Boro lost the momentum and whether that ultimately cost them? I mean, the injuries are a major, major contributing factor, aren't they?
I don't think the way that the season finished was ideal for Boro. I think that playing competitive matches right up to the end is a better way of doing it if you at all can. But then the flip side of that is Luton's playoff place was secured at exactly the same time as Boro was, and they've managed to turn it on against Sunderland, and they're in the final. So I don't think it's necessarily as clear cut as they made it, that was the reason. And like you say, to be fair to Michael Carrick, for most of the time in those 3 games, other than probably resting Akpom and Hackney in that Luton game, he's pretty much picking the team that he's got without wanting to take any undue risks with injured players who are just trying to get back, which is sent. You wouldn't want to do. You're damned as you do, damned as you don't. There, if he rushes Force back or Ramsey back or whoever, and they're not right and they break down within 10 minutes of coming back, well, that's the worst case scenario for everyone. So I have some sympathy with Michael Carrick because I don't think he could have done it an awful lot different. But I just think that the way that things panned out through circumstance didn't really suit Boro.
And when you look back, that Huddersfield weekend feels, in hindsight, like like such a pivotal weekend, because going into that weekend, that was coming off the international break when I made Boro favourite. I know they were still playing catch up, but I made Boro favourites to probably catch Sheffield United. And I think I'd have to double check this, but I think at half time in play that day when Boro were winning and Sheffield United were drawing the Norwich, that was down to 1 point, maybe 1 point or 2 points. And then Warnock came back and Huddersfield got that win. Sheffield United won. That was the day when the automatic promotion hopes realistically ended, wasn't it? And when you look back, the best we saw of Boro under Carrick was probably that spell when they blew Sheffield United away. There's no doubt that Boro were the second best team in the Championship at that stage, but only Burnley were better than them. And I wrote yesterday, and I absolutely mean this. If promotion for long stages of the second half felt like an inevitability, really.
It did, but without necessarily kind of. I think one of the interesting dynamics of this season has been the fact that because they were at such a low ebb when Carrick came in, and because let's be honest, towards the end under Wilder, relegation was a possibility, or at least a relegation battle. So because there was always that, Michael Carrick's kind of always been able to deflect any semblance of pressure or any questions about expectation or ambition or whatever to, look, I came in, I inherited a team that we've just been taking it game by game, week by week. I just want to make these players better, etc., etc. That's fine. The narrative has to be different next season, because whether Michael Carrick likes it or not, there will be an expectation at the start of next season, regardless of what's happened in the summer, that Boro have to target the top two and get in the playoffs as a minimum requirement. Simple as that. So, whereas he has been able to kind of deflect the bigger picture questions about what are your ambitions for this team this season, it's going to be a lot harder for him to do that next season. And it's not really going to wash if he's kind of saying, look, we're just taking it step by step, game by game. Yeah, that's all fine. But the fans, are perfectly right to think, well, this team got in the playoffs last season. There will be rebuilding. As long as that goes anywhere near acceptably, Boro have to be targeting the top six as a minimum requirement next season. That will be a slightly different dynamic, which will be interesting, I think. Yeah,
and there's no getting away from that, is there? Like you say. And after the game on Wednesday night, you said he said, didn't he, about injuries, I'm not going to make excuses. But you also touched on the fact that this is your first full summer now, and this is a chance to almost put your stamp on it and make it your team. And he responded immediately, didn't he, and said, this is my team. I'm happy to put my name to this team. Which maybe gives us an indication. And I know his hand is going to be forced given that the loan players, but it's not, sometimes you look at managers and think they've played the game, but they've maybe had to put up with players who in an ideal world, if they'd gone out and signed them, they wouldn't have signed them. It doesn't feel like Carrick's going to be looking, as perhaps Chris Wilder did last year, and made it clear that, there's 4 or 5 players I want out here.
These are not for me. Yeah. No, I don't think that. And strip away the loan players and the spine of that Boro team, Fry, McNair, Lenihan, Johnny Howson, Hayden Hackney, Tuber,
McGree.
Force on one side, McGree on the other. That is the spine of a very strong side. And it's a side that, I have absolutely no doubt that Michael Carrick's more than happy to put his name to, because that's the core of this Boro team. And it's the core of a very good Championship team, and it will be next season. So, the question this summer is, can you add the depth underneath that? And can you add the little smatterings of quality that we saw in this season via Stefan, Giles, Archer to just, elevate that little bit higher? Do you think there'll be players leaving this summer? Because that's the kind of interesting thing. The obvious one probably would be Isaiah Jones. You suspect that if Boro could get a bid that was anywhere near acceptable, it's hard to see him having too much of a long-term future if other players come in and everything. But I can't imagine with already losing all the loan players, there'll be too much of any kind of a fire sale or anything.
No, Jones is the obvious one that comes to mind, isn't it? And for all he came back and made that huge impact, he hasn't managed to maintain that, has he, over the course of the playoffs?
No,
And I thought he was poor from the bench on Wednesday night, although that's a difficult game to come into, isn't it? But you do look at Jones and wonder whether it would maybe suit all parties this summer if he kind of moved on, if the opportunity presented itself, if obviously Boro got a good deal. Yeah. Boro aren't short in those. Well, they've got Forsum agree, but you would think they're obviously, they brought Ramsey in January, so we can take it from that it's an area that they're going to look to strengthen again this summer. I'm still not convinced that had Boro not had the injury problems, that Jones would have come back into the fold and been given the opportunities, really. But I think he's the obvious one that comes to mind. Obviously, Akpom's going into the last 12 months of his contract, but there's been, you look at Ross Stewart, for example, up the road at Sunderland, and this constant uncertainty, and it's felt with Akpom that there is an element of calm, isn't there, about it? And Akpom at every opportunity has talked about how happy he is. Now, where that changes is if a Premier League club, if Akpom doesn't sign a new deal early in the summer, and if a Premier League club suddenly throw big money, desperately think we need a centre forward and throw big money at it late in the window, and he has 12 months left on his deal, then there's clearly a decision to make. But I don't foresee Akpom leaving Boro this summer.
I don't, and I completely agree with you that at the moment, he's been brilliant for Boro, hasn't he? He's been absolutely fantastic. He couldn't have done really anything more this season, bar maybe in the last couple of games when it just didn't quite go. But he's been fantastic. But I would argue it's hard to see at the moment a Premier League club saying, right, we're going to start the summer with our main number one target being Chuba Akpom, and we'll build the rest of our attack around that. Now, come the last week of the transfer window, I agree with you. If you're, let's put names out of the sky, Everton who have stayed up, or Sheffield United who have come up, and you need a third striker, say, or whatever, then Chuba Akpom with 12 months left on his deal at Boro becomes a potentially attractive option. So I could see that, and Boro might have decisions to make then, which will be interesting. But I don't envisage it being the narrative of the summer, because I just, like you say, I don't see Premier League clubs at this stage saying, right, our number one summer target is Chuba Akpom, let's go out and do all we can to get him. I don't think he's there yet. Do you?
No, and no, I don't. And Akpom at every opportunity this season has talked about, hasn't he, how he's found the manager he's always dreamed of. He's found the home that he's been looking for his whole career. This isn't a player who is angling for a Premier League move, is it? Absolutely.
No, absolutely not. No, there's been no indications whatsoever that you're right, that there's any kind of pushing at a door there or anything, and that it's potentially going to be difficult for Boro to hold on to. I don't see that. Everything about him seemed, like you say, he's more than happy with where his career is at the moment in terms of where it's been in the last 3 or 4 years. And he just wants to keep that going, and working under Carrick at Boro seems to be the right way to do that.
Well, as we said at the start, it wasn't the You Are My Boro that we wanted to be recording at the back end of this week. We had all sorts planned, didn't we, for our... I mean, how many times did we talk about our Wembley Travel Lodge special the night before?
Wembley specials, left, right and centre, yeah. I can't imagine that Trafalgar Square is going to be chaotic with Luton and Coventry fans, can you?
No.
Not going to happen. The party's gone.
I know it was that flat feeling when you wake up on Thursday morning, wasn't it? And you realise that that's that, and that's
it was. It really was. I mean, I was at Luton as well for the Sunderland game, and you came away from there thinking, okay, that's a disappointment, but we've still got Boro. Boro is still going to do it. And then I don't know. The more the day went on, the more you're thinking, do you know? I really thought about the possibility of neither of them making it. And there we are. There we are. It's a bit of blow, but I think that the dust's just about settling now, isn't it? And you do have to look back to the start of the season, and you do have to look at just how grim a season it felt like it might be towards the end of the Wilder era. The spell under Leo when it just seemed like chaos and you wondered where on earth were Boro heading to. You know, I think you have to take a step back and say, look, massive progress has been made. They've got the right man at the helm. Let's build from here.
And that's the thing, I think, as a last point, you look back to Preston at the end of last season when Boro finished the season with momentum completely disappeared. Form had gone off a cliff. You'd have Chris Wilder and obviously the whole thing with Burnley. He was clearly already setting about making his own agendas clear in regards to the summer transfer window and the type of player he wanted coming in. And this isn't a case of speaking after the event. It was clear, wasn't it, as to how that was going to play out and the fact that heads were going to be knocked together. Whereas you look at this summer on the pitch, Boro are starting in a position of strength, other than the fact that the loan players, as we've discussed. But off the pitch, you know, January was pretty seamless. We know that Michael Carrick and Kieran Scott and Neil Bowser and Steve Gibson are pulling in the same direction. It feels very different to 12 months ago, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the massive positive. You know, when Michael Carrick came in, you know, all the stuff we were talking about, all the stuff we were writing was the big positive. They should be after two successive regimes of managers who just didn't fit the model Boro were trying to operate in. Now they've finally got someone who does. And like you say, the evidence of January suggested that. Let's hope the evidence of this summer proves it. There's absolutely no reason to think that it won't, because like you say, everything you hear about the way things are running behind the scenes is that it's just chalk and cheese to where we were at this point 12 months ago, when Boro knew they were in for a battle with Chris Wilder about who was in charge, who was signing players, what type of players we're getting, who's going, who's not going. It doesn't feel like that this summer, and that's a massive, massive positive, because if everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet and if everyone does pull together, then, you know, like we've alluded to already here today, there's the core of a very good squad there. It's not going to need an awful lot to get it into an even better shape come the start of the season.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Scott. And thanks to all those who've watched and listened since we launched this a few months ago. As we said at the start, we are going to continue our videos and podcasts throughout the summer, obviously, and without games to look forward to. If there's anything offbeat you want us to discuss, our combined playoff final 11 idea is obviously going to go out the window now. But if there are any other kind of offbeat ideas, anything you want us to discuss,
we'll probably try and do a vid in the next 2 or 3 weeks that's just purely your questions, anything you want us to talk about or ask the club, or then so anything like that, fire it on the comments below, and we'll have a kind of a listener/viewer question special within the next couple of weeks.
And we'll be back next week. Thanks very much for watching and listening.